This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight now, we bring you a discussion on India-China relation in the current context. The participants are Atul Aneja, strategic analyst, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Today we are discussing the developments on the India-China border, and we saw the brutal attacks by the Chinese army on Monday night, which left 20 Indian soldiers dead and many seriously injured. And this is also being regarded as a watershed moment in the India-China relationships, where the aggressiveness of the Chinese army and the state has come under question, and also the India-China relationship. Mr. Aneja, when you look at this brutal attack that has been carried by the Chinese troops on Indian army, how do you see it in the fact that India-China border for a long time was peaceful, despite the fact that the tensions between India and China have at times gone up and gone down?
This is something which is sort of unprecedented. After 1962, I can compare it to an event, something like that, because as you said, this is a watershed moment. And I think it is going to have very grave implications. It is resetting the entire relationship between India and China. And it can't be business as usual anymore. There will have to be certain military obligations on the part of China. They'll have to restore status quo ante. And I think it's going to have implications beyond the military level, even in the relationship we have with them on the economic side, people to people, cultural. So I think it's a big moment, and this is a very, very sad but a watershed moment, as you mentioned.
If we look at the fact that we have seen that the India-China relations has had its share of tensions, but we've also seen that economically the relationship has so far been pretty good. We've had a good trading relationship with China. But in the same time, over the last few years, if we look at the Chinese behavior, particularly in the South China Sea, we have seen the Chinese get very aggressive. Do you somewhere feel that what has happened on Monday, June 15th, by the Chinese army is just another example of how aggressive the Chinese are getting and how much they really want to dominate the entire world, especially the Asian region?
I don't think we need to come to a blanket conclusion. Each theater is separate. I can see what is happening in the South China Sea is partly a response also to the accumulation of U.S. forces over there under the pivot to Asia doctrine. So there's a separate dynamic which is going on over there. There's also nationalism coming in Taiwan, and the Chinese also being aggressive towards Taiwan. There have been Hong Kong protests which have continued for too long, which has made Chinese edgy. There's also the COVID-19 issue where China was blamed probably for deliberately leaking the virus from the Wuhan lab. That accusation did come. The response has been overall aggressive, but I see it in those theaters. I am surprised that this has filtered into the India-China equation, because we are talking of a situation which is the post-Chennai moment, where we had a framework in a way to go forward on all dimensions, including economic and cultural. So this has come as a big surprise as to why the Chinese have done so. I think they have miscalculated big time here, because if you're following the narrative as it is coming from China, after we have had standoff in Ladakh, there's a think tank to the Chinese government. Their political objective of this is that India should remove Article 370. I think they've got it completely wrong, because I don't think, especially even before the event and definitely after the event of the killing of Indian troops, that is a political objective that can hardly be achieved. In fact, I recall that on August 12th, 2019, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar was in Beijing, and he very clearly explained to the Chinese authorities that Article 370 has no bearing on India's territorial borders, either along the line of control or along the LAC. So I don't see why that should have been misunderstood. So I think the Chinese have completely read the script wrong. And after what has happened on Monday, I think that there will be a response from the Indian side. I don't say that there's necessarily going to be a knee-jerk military response, but somehow, using all the instruments of influence, I think the government of India is committed to restoring status quo ante. Until the time that is done, until the time there is a real explanation as to why such a situation took place in the Galwan Valley, and there are structural changes which are made by China internally, I don't see how things will get back to track between these two countries.
We've also seen that, as you have pointed out, Article 370 and China's own interpretation of it. Do you feel that somewhere China also acts in this manner? And as you have rightly said, that this has taken everyone by surprise because no one really expected China to breach peace that was holding for so long. Do you feel this is also a part of their way of, one, asserting themselves in the region? Two, what they have always done is back Pakistan's claims wherever needed, whether it was the United Nations or it is any matter where India and Pakistan also come in conflict. We have seen China backing Pakistan, acting as their all-time friend. Do you feel that the regional geopolitics also plays into this?
Definitely. I think there is a big change which has taken place in the China-Pakistan equation after China started its Belt and Road Initiative, which is a giant connectivity project along the ancient Silk Road. One of the flagships of the Belt and Road Initiative is the CPEC, that is China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which, by the way, goes through Gilgit-Baltistan, which is claimed by India. But because of CPEC, the Chinese have sunk in billions of dollars in this project. So if there is a fear that after Article 370 that somehow India is going to recover Gilgit-Baltistan and fulfill the resolution of Parliament of 1994, I think the Chinese should have been reassured that there is going to be no change along the LOC. And if there were still concerns left, the doors of dialogue were open for the Chinese to talk to the Indian side and satisfy themselves that the status quo would remain and whatever has to be resolved would be resolved through the border talks which are already going on between the special representative along the diplomatic channel. So I think the Chinese rushed into this. If they had concerns, they should have raised it with the Indian side. But there is another point. One, is the PLA really under the complete control of President Xi Jinping? That's a question. I do think that this particular action by PLA probably would not have taken place, the scale it has been done, without the clearance from the top. But that is a question which has arisen. And second thing is that regarding CPEC, why avoid a dialogue with India? And India has opposed it, but there were fears about its investment, etc. That needed to be thrashed out and resolved, because what has been done is a very extreme kind of move by the Chinese side, and that extreme move now has become something which is completely unacceptable to India, especially after the killing of Indian troops. I think we got to look at the internal dynamics of China more carefully than we have done before as to why these things are happening. I find it little superficial to assume that it is a diversion to divert attention from their internal problems, because frankly, while there are problems in especially Hong Kong specifically, I don't see that kind of a movement within mainland China. I don't see that strong enough argument for this action. The second argument is, of course, have the Chinese become so aggressive? Well, if he has become so aggressive, then he should realize and think through that the repercussions of this may not be good for China, because it is bringing the rest of the world and big powers closer together, which may be detrimental to Chinese interests. And before upping the ante as they have done, a final question which comes to mind is, have the Chinese underestimated the resolve of the government of India and of the Indian armed forces? Is that a factor which has gone into this? I've still not got to a very convincing answer as to the cause of this. But it does seem to be that there are certain very rash elements which have got into leadership positions in China, which have sort of taken this extreme action, which may boomerang in the China, if not in the short run, but definitely in the medium and long term.
As you pointed out, the presidency and the leadership of President Xi Jinping, and we've also seen him come to India. We have seen him on multiple occasions interact with our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And one, as you pointed out, is very surprised at the actions of the Chinese army then on Monday, and the brutality in which they have killed the Indian soldiers. If we were to look at this a little more closely, and as you pointed out, there are issues within China, they have their own problems. There has also been the pressure on China by the United States. Do you feel that these global strains that China feels from the US, from other places, also maybe adds to this, as you said, a very rash kind of a behavior?
There is no doubt that there is extreme pressure on China from the United States on several fronts. There is a trade war which is going on, so there is an economic pressure which is coming in. There is a military pressure which is coming in. There is an internal crisis which is coming in, which of course it is being fanned in the US media. So there is a full spectrum pressure which is coming on China from United States. And this is something very fundamental in the sense this is a reminder of what happened in the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union, which took place. There is some similarity with that because this is like a Cold War which has been unleashed between these two countries. So yes, there is extreme pressure to which China would perceive, and added to that is apparent loss of face because of the accusations from world over about their role in the spread of COVID-19. So there is no doubt that pressure is there. But then if that pressure is there, to relieve that pressure, you don't open another front, that is with India, because at this time you would need India not only as a market, but as a base for your startups, for your investments. As you know, billions in dollars of investments are taking place. You would open another front with India and jeopardize all your investments and your future presence in a very large emerging economy. It doesn't make sense as to why you would do this at a time when economic logic shows that when you are boxed in, don't make more enemies than you already have. Only logic I can say is complete miscalculation at the top leadership level and wrong advice and wrong information about India's response and role, because as India, right from the time of our independence, first non-aligned movement, we were in that frame, and then we moved after the nuclear test into a strategic autonomy phase where we look at other countries through our interests and bond with them accordingly. We are not alliance partners with anyone and have not been that way. So this needs a further and deeper explanation. I think the answers would come by analysis of what is happening within the Communist Party of China, which faction is the one which has risen to more influential position, and who is calling the shot inside. So we've got to look for explanation deep within the Chinese system, I think, to find a convincing answer to this situation which has emerged in Ladakh, especially along the Galwan Valley.
We also see that India has now been elected and will be from 2021-2022 will be non-permanent member in the United Nations Security Council. And there have been people who have pointed out that this would add to China's insecurity. China has always looked at Asia and the world at large to be more China-dominated. Do you feel that the fact that India is now getting more global legitimacy, our seat on the UNSC as a non-permanent member, our role in WHO getting more enhanced, do you feel that insecurity also feeds into the Chinese psyche and would or might have prompted them to do this rash thing, as you said?
I don't know why the Chinese go down on that spiral. I think where China really lost the trick was that while they talked about the rise of China and the world accepting the rise of China, the Chinese did not fully accept or even partially accept the equivalent rise of India, a huge country with tremendous potential and comprehensive national power, which was being supported by the rest of the world as a member of the UN Security Council. Except for the Chinese, we have had the endorsement of most other countries. When it comes to international technology clubs like the Nuclear Suppliers Group, the rest of the world was willing to accept India within that fold, but the Chinese resisted. As an analyst, I understand their relationship with Pakistan in terms of geopolitics because Pakistan's geography gives them access to the Indian Ocean. But to put Pakistan and India on the same footing has been a gross error of judgment from the Chinese side. While they can have their equation with the Pakistanis, but this excessive influence of Pakistan on Chinese foreign policy is a major factor which I think is dissuading a more normal relationship between China and India. I spoke about CPEC and Chinese investments in that, but that should not persuade them to have a strategic alliance to surround India. Because then again, you are showing your excessive preference to a country, which is Pakistan, and looking at India through a Pakistani lens. And that is something which the Chinese need to shed completely and build their relationship like other countries do on very separate tracks.
And in the coming days, we will continue our discussions on the India-China relationships. With this, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on India-China relation in the current context. The participants were Atul Aneja, strategic analyst, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.